Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Tipsy's F1 podcast. I am your host, Tipsy Pineapple, and today we are going to talk about the Australian Grand Prix. That's my post-race reaction. Everything happened. We watched the race this morning. I'm recording this on the evening after the race occurred. Oh, and by the way, we have intro music if you hadn't just noticed that go off. I hope we actually put that in. Otherwise, this is just awkward, me talking about intro music when we don't actually have intro music. Today was a crazy day. The race was insane. We had 3, maybe even 4 red flags. Wait, let me count. So we had 1 red flag at the start, a 2nd red flag later, then another one. We actually theoretically had 4 red flags. I'll go into that later. But we had a lot of red flags in this race. It was just a mental race with crazy FIA decisions. I don't know. People are going to call this Crashgate. There was jet lag madness. Maybe that was the cause for all the crazy decisions in red flags and even just all the crashes in general and lockups. And it was good. It was a really, really good race. Aside from the fact that it had to be super early for those of us who are not Australian. And the result of all that is the standings are in a pretty weird place now that we're 3 races into the season. So I'll also talk about that towards the end of the podcast. But before we dive into the race, let's just talk about that one comment that has been popping up. I mentioned it in the last episode of this podcast. We are talking about the thoughts on reducing practice sessions. Obviously, Stefano Domenicali made his random statement that was probably off the cuff, nothing serious, and everyone's quoted him like crazy and wondering, what is this crazy guy smoking? He had said, we are thinking about removing practice sessions. He's highly in favor of it, or at least reducing the amount of practice sessions, which at the start, I had that typical reaction that most people have where it was like, why fix something that isn't broken? But looking into it more, listening to other drivers' thoughts on it, I flip-flop based off of whoever's talking because they do have differing opinions. But it just got me thinking, hey, we should talk about this a bit more because I did leave some stuff out in the last one, like the actual driver reactions and maybe team reactions. First of all, people had ideas for replacements. One not very viable replacement option, but I thought it was good, and I don't think I mentioned it in the previous podcast, was the option of doing reverse grid. Maybe I did mention that. I actually mentioned that. But the idea of doing reverse grid, which is interesting, not actually, I said reverse grid. I meant reverse track layout, which obviously looking at the track layouts, they're going to be, very different. If you reverse a track layout, it's a completely different track. It's not slightly similar. It is just completely different. And they're not actually like F1 graded ready. To which I say, I don't care if they're not F1 graded ready. That would be cool to see. But alas, I don't think that's ever going to happen. It messes up with too many things. And the point of practice is that they could actually get a little feel of the track layout and not just throw them into qualifying blindly. I think the main point is they're just thinking of reducing the practice sessions or repurposing those sessions in the weekend. So one of the things they've also mentioned, someone has mentioned, it's not like actual official FIA stuff. This is just me reading Twitter and, trying to actually tolerate it. But some people have mentioned it would be a good idea for Pirelli to do tire testing on those practice sessions. So how last year they had those unmarked tires. You didn't know what tires they were using, but they were just driving on tires that they were allocated. And it was like, try out these tires. Let's see if they work well or if they're terrible, and just try tire testing. To which I say, that's a great idea. I think it's an epic opportunity for Pirelli to do some development, and rather than focusing on the teams, the drivers can at least practice the track, and the teams can work on versatile car setups by using these fake tires, these unused tires. And yeah, just, obviously with all the teams, the experience will be the same, or not the same because they will be unused tires. Maybe you put them all on the same tire, I don't know, but then they don't have a good test case. So there's a lot of ways of like, okay, maybe that might not be fair, especially now that I'm rethinking it, but that's a potential option for this. One of the other things that I thought would be a cool idea is make it like mandatory for them to use F1 Academy drivers and feeder series drivers, like having to have the F2 drivers or F3 drivers or even IndyCar drivers in there, like just random other reserve drivers. Maybe it doesn't even have to be junior drivers. It could just be like additional drivers, like testing drivers, like having Daniel Ricciardo in a practice session, just forcing them to have a practice session. One of those practice sessions be not your main drivers running the session. So you have like practice 1 with the main driver and then practice 2 with a different driver who's not the main driver, or vice versa. Just practice one or practice two, give it to a different driver. And that just, it makes the sport a little bit more exciting if people are supporting those feeder series drivers, thinking one day that driver might make it into F1. You get to see them on track early. I think that's interesting, especially if you make them all, practice series drivers. Obviously, it's a big risk on the teams because putting in drivers who don't usually drive F1 cars could, if they crash or bin the car, it's not going to look good for them, and the team's obviously suffering while, giving these other drivers a chance to drive their car. Either way, I think it's really great. The final thought on reducing practice sessions, which I think is the best, is actually following the format of the feeder series. I've been thoroughly enjoying the parts of the feeder series I could watch. I haven't watched the feature races for F3 and F2 yet, but the qualifying and the sprint races were very interesting. Like, as you can imagine, we've had a crazy F1 race. If you haven't seen the feeder series, they had just as many crashes and red flags and safety cars all over the place. It was great to watch. And I do like that format. They have one practice session, then that same day they have qualifying. The next day, they go straight into a sprint race. And the day after that, they go into a full-on feature race. So the days are just more exciting. It's less testing, less practicing, and just diving straight in with qualifying action. Now, let's look at the drivers' takes on that. They asked the various drivers in press conferences. Well, mainly, they asked them in all the press conferences, I think, like even the ones before the race. But the main takeaways that I got was from them talking to Logan Sargent, who he very much was in favor of following the way the feeder series worked because he's used to it. He did say that him as a rookie, it's nice to have those extra practice sessions, but most of the drivers, including him being a rookie, said they don't need that many practice sessions. We just need a few laps and then we're used to the track. We're professional drivers. Like, of course, they're going to be fine with only having one practice session and then into qualifying. We've seen that in the sprint race format weekends where they have a single practice session and they dive into qualifying. Like, yes, they might not have the perfect setup that they needed or wanted, but hey, it's fair. All the teams get the same amount of practice time. So I think it works. I really like the idea of following the feeder series format. George Russell said he was initially against this idea. And then as he saw it actually unfold and the fans and thoughts about them, he realized, like, hey, that's more action in the weekend. It could be fun. I think right now they like that healthy, have a sprint race here or there and then, something else. But yeah, I don't know. Max was the only one that I really heard some good pushback from. I say good pushback, some solid pushback. Like, he is not a fan of changing what they currently have. He doesn't like sprint races because in his opinion, it's just surviving. Literally, that's for him as a person who's usually winning. It's like just trying to survive, get through that first lap. And especially what we've seen this weekend, it is like if you're in the front there and you have all these red flag restarts, it's just these scary moments. Like the first lap is the scariest moment for all these top drivers because they need to survive. Once it's past that, it's just about having good pace and racing and making safe overtakes. But that first lap chaos is always there. And the sprint race is another place for them to have that first lap chaos. At least in the feeder series, let me talk about that in a brief moment here. For the feeder series, they have qualifying, and the qualifying decides where you're going to be in that feature race on the Sunday. It doesn't decide the sprint race. The sprint race is actually a reverse grid for the top 10 drivers in F2 and the top 12 drivers in F3, which is really interesting because it means you still have that incentive to qualify well, because if you don't qualify in that top half of the grid, you don't get the reverse to front. So if you're slow, and they just put you at the back anyway. But if you are up there, if you qualify 10th in F2, you actually start on pole for the sprint race, and you get to see if your race pace was better than your qualifying. And it's just, I think it's really, really interesting. But yeah, that said, Max is not a fan because it does, it adds extra stress. He says they're under a lot of pressure already. You've already got so many race weekends in the year, so it's just a bit too much. And he says they're worried about teams, engineers, drivers all burning out with having that much activity on track. But theoretically, the amount of time that they spend in practice the amount of time that they spend in practice, if you just replaced one of the practice sessions with qualifying, replaced qualifying with a sprint race that should last about an hour, it actually works out, especially if we take out, an extra practice session, it works out that they'll be on the track about the same time, if not even less. But obviously that generally involves more media duties, which is probably what Max is talking about, because you're going to have post-qualifying, you're going to have post-sprint race stuff. As a race winner, Max is going to be experiencing the brunt of that by having to do all those media duties. So that's probably why he's not too much of a fan of it, because he's like, I can win this enough on my own by doing less. So for him, it's just, I guess, more work, more stress, because in his practice sessions, he seems quite relaxed. And obviously, he's probably going to be less relaxed if he's going to be doing races all the time. Let's take this moment to talk about qualifying for the Australian Grand Prix. To be honest, I slept through a lot of it, because we had in Q1, we had Perez causing a red flag, which was pretty big to see. It was like, whoa, that's crazy for Perez. I kind of wish it had happened to Max and not Perez, because I liked that idea that we had a Perez Max fight for the championship. And even though I was pretty sure that Max would eventually take it away, Perez caused that accident. And I mean, it wasn't too unexpected either, because if you looked at the practice sessions, Perez was just having a bad weekend. He obviously, in the race made up for it, but we'll talk about that later on in this podcast. But that was the only real surprise for me. Other than that, I watched that, then it was a red flag. I had a nap, watched it continue again. Then it was the end of Q1. I had another nap, watched a bit of Q2, fell asleep, woke up for the last qualifying session, which that was really interesting. It was cool to see Mercedes back. For moments, I thought like, whoa, Hamilton's got pole. Like, he had a really good lap. And then Max obviously beat him there. But and then Russell did really well as well. So having that Max, Russell, Hamilton, that obviously went quite far against my predictions that I had for the weekend. Just because I didn't think, well, I assumed that the Astons would beat the Mercedes. So yeah, that was qualifying in a nutshell. Not much to say there, but it was interesting, Perez's position. Obviously, I don't want to spend too much time talking about this, because we have stuff to talk about regarding the race. Let's talk about the Australian Grand Prix race. Let's do a recap there. It was a crazy start with both George and Lewis getting past Max there as we had lights out and away we go in that first two turns. It was crazy. I couldn't believe that George and Lewis made it past Max. And Alonso was looking pretty solid to make it past as well. Then very early on, I think it was Stroll who ended up hitting Leclerc, and Leclerc ended up getting beached. So that caused a safety car. And remember that Perez started from the back. He decided to pit during that safety car. It was very sad for Ferrari there. They had a very unlucky start to the race. It was just, oh, you hate to see it. But in the end, yeah, Perez decided to pit right away. I think for this race, I wasn't actually expecting it to be too fun. I thought it was going to be quite boring. But then, looking at the feeder series, seeing F2 and F3 having all these crashes in their races, I thought, oh, maybe it could happen here. And based off of Perez's qualifying, running off the track, other people also running off the track in practice and qualifying, it made me think maybe the race would be exciting. And yeah, it was right there, 100% correct there. Regarding pit strategies, there wasn't too much exciting stuff to look out for there. Like, Perez pitted onto, well, he started on hards, he pitted onto mediums, and then the second lap of the safety car, still same safety car, Perez pitted again back to hards, because they thought, if there's no more safety cars, he won't have to pit again, and that's his way of making his way up the field. So people were pretty convinced, I think mostly based off of how Alex Albon took the race last year. He obviously raced pretty much the whole race on hards, and then just pitted at the end of the race because he had a mandatory pit stop and got points, and that worked well for him. So maybe they were thinking Perez could do the same thing, and that would be the strategy there. Obviously, the race got underway again, and then Alex Albon crashed. He had a pretty hectic crash. I was mind blown. It was just out of nowhere. Didn't expect it. But yeah, it was a rough crash for Alex, which was a big shame, because he was in the points. He was doing well. He qualified really well. Obviously, with Leclerc going out, I think for a while he was in P6 or was P7. I can't remember. He was doing really well. I was so excited for him. And then poor Alex Albon ended up having that crash, causing our first red flag of the session, because they got a lot of gravel on the track. Alex's car was pretty stuffed up, so they had to not fix it. They had to take it off the track, which involved a lot of time. So the race directors decided to red flag the race, to which I say was good, because usually what happens is they have a safety car, and the safety car goes around for ages before they eventually we should probably red flag the race. This time they were on it. They red flagged it straight away. It still screwed George and Stroll quite a lot, because they decided to pit, and I thought that was a smart move. You could hear, it's quite funny, Lewis was complaining on the radio. He's like, oh man, guys, we should have pitted and we missed out this opportunity, which I don't think he should have, because I think you could see, was it Science who pitted? I think Science also pitted the same lap there that George and Stroll pitted, because Stroll came out, or maybe it wasn't Stroll who pitted. I can't remember. I think it was Stroll and Science. George pitted. Science was obviously not too far behind, and Science pitted, and you could see that Science came out like he lost way more track positions. I think George came out around 7th and Science came out around 12th. So it really, you could see like they were so close together. If Lewis had pitted, he would have lost track position. He would have been behind Science. He would have been all the way back in like P14 or something. So he would have been really screwed over by that, like the red flag that happened straight after those guys pitting. So I think it's good that the FIA was quick with that. Obviously, you have to react quickly in those scenarios, and George got unlucky. The FIA couldn't have like known right away, like, oh, we should make this a red flag. Obviously, they're very quick to say, safety car, we gotta chill. Yellow flag, safety car, stop. That was good, and that gives them time to essentially slow down and time for the FIA to decide. But obviously, just based off where the cars were on the track, it meant that these guys were unlucky in the sense that they decided to riskfully gamble on pitting there and assuming that the race would work out in their favor if they pitted then. Because, again, here's the logic going through their heads. Knowing that the drivers can essentially make it to the end of the race without needing to pit later on hards, pitting now and then just saying, okay, we're going to be on hards for the rest of the race, that's a great strategy for them. If there's no more incidents, that works out really well in their favor. Obviously, unfortunately for them, there were lots of incidents. Obviously, the restart happened after the red flag, and it was a fairly decent restart. I don't think too much chaos happened in that red flag restart. Lewis was able to hold position for a while, which was also cool to see, and unfortunately for Alonso, he couldn't keep up with them. I mean, he was there, he was trying, but then he went into like management zone, which was good. Alonso managed the race very well. He did a great job. Unfortunately, after all that, George's engine ended up dying and went on fire. So it was a pretty spectacular burn to the ground moment. I couldn't believe that. That was really sad to see for George. So in the end, it's like a bit bittersweet because it's not that what if. No, it's not bittersweet. It can't be bittersweet to not finish the race because, again, the what if, there were so many opportunities later on where things could have happened with the red flags and crashes. Like the race could have gone completely differently if his car didn't do that. But effectively, if his car was going to burn out there that early into the race, it would have probably happened regardless of whether or not he pitted. So it just made everything a bit pointless and meaningless. Then nothing much happened. I kind of fell asleep during the rest of the race because it was just like, okay, well, nobody's going to pit. Perez is going to make overtakes, but it's not going to be that impressive, which they were very impressive. He had some great overtakes on people, and he went for it, which I was quite impressed by Perez's actions, given the fact that he was looking so lacking with confidence in the whole weekend. He did some fantastic overtakes. I think like half the year's overtakes are going to go to Perez just in Australia. So that was cool to see. I woke up occasionally for hearing a Crofty shout like, oh, what an amazing overtake for Perez. It was very enjoyable. Then I started waking up thinking, okay, it's the last few laps of the race. Alonso's probably going to push. Drivers are going to do some crazy moves to try and get those positions. They played the management game, and now we're going to see some chaos at the end of the race. I was pretty sure that was going to happen. But then we had that crazy crash from K-Mag, so unexpected. He just nicked the wall. He just took that corner a little bit too wide, which was, I guess it was probably due to the sun going in his eyes. That's probably the main cause of that. The sun was setting due to all the other red flags and safety cars. They had talked about this in practice, saying like, hey, if the race goes on with red flags and safety cars in the F1 race, we're going to have some sun going in drivers' eyes. And I think that caused some chaos last year as well. It was either there or it was Miami. It might have been both. But we had some good chaos going on there. And this makes me excited for the Miami Grand Prix. This Australian Grand Prix was very enjoyable. I love the fact that we have gravel, everything all over the place. Anyways, let's move on to talking about that. We had a red flag caused by K-Mag's big out of nowhere crash. And that red flag restart was crazy because it was essentially going to be 2 racing laps from a standstill start. But we didn't even get that far because we didn't even make it through the first sector without chaos occurring. It started off in turn 1 where Sainz, he tapped Alonso and Alonso spun out, and that was Alonso's race ruined, which was so unfortunate. Then we had Perez go pretty much off the road. that was just out of the blue. Like, you don't even notice in all this because you're too busy looking at Alonso going. So people are just going all over the place. It looked like F1 game lobbies. It was crazy. Part of that, before the rest of the chaos happened, was Logan Sargent right at the back just crashed into De Vries, which is just so unnecessary. Like, I mean, Logan wasn't having a good race. He didn't qualify as well as Albon. He was literally at the back. He was like the last person to really finish. He just... it was an unnecessary crash, costing obviously both teams a lot of money. These aren't like really good doing teams, so that's just an unnecessary crash from them. They could have probably bagged points if they weren't crashing. If all the other bad stuff didn't happen, like it's hard to explain. Obviously, big crashes happened. It suddenly meant that the grid was completely shuffled, but then they reversed back to what the grid was before the restart happened. So it wouldn't have worked out in Logan Sargent and De Vries' favor. But, if things had worked out differently, that could have been points for Logan Sargent and De Vries because they would have scored points. While other people like Gasly and them crashed out and Alonso and Stroll spun out and all that stuff. Because at the end, it was Alonso and Stroll at the back, just behind De Vries and... Well, I mean, behind them was De Vries and Logan Sargent. So, yeah. Anyways, the big thing that was the main cause of that red flag was the next red flag, the one that followed. We're running our red flag counting here. But Gasly went off and he came back on the track and took out Ocon. Terrible move. Like, this is similar to what Gasly did last year with Miami. Like, he locked up, went off, had a bad one. And then when he re-entered the track, he took out Norris in Miami last year. This year, he did the same thing. He did it with Ocon. Obviously, it wasn't like teammate beef. It was just an accident. I'm sure they're not going to blame each other for it. It's just very, very unlucky for the Alpines. It's not like Ocon. I don't think Ocon's going to be very mad at Gasly. He's going to be disappointed and sad, but I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's some serious beef they're going like... It is hectic for the Alpines because both Gasly and Ocon were going to score points. They're pretty much like... best of the rest team, going strong, and alas, I actually have to look at the standings and see where the teams are standing. I've looked at the driver standings, but I need to look at the teams as well, so I'll look at that and talk about that later on in this podcast. Anyway, another thing that happened was Stroll went off the track. He got beached. Almost. He was not beached because he was able to get back on the track, but after all that chaos, Stroll went off and lost all these positions, which, it was such a bad one for Aston Martin. They were so, like, they had it right until the end, and then they didn't have it. Luckily for them, like, in the end, we had to have this long wait, decision for an outcome. After all those spins and crashes and chaos, Hulkenberg was fourth. And in my mind, which obviously was in the FIA's mind as well, is Sainz caused Alonso to spin, which could result in a penalty, which could mean that Hulkenberg would have moved up to getting his first podium. And it would have also been Haas's first ever podium. It would have been a huge thing for Haas. Very, very, very unfortunate that happened the way it did, because in the end, they reversed the results, which I agree with, because if you look at how they handled Silverstone last year, it's pretty much the same way they handled it there. So they're following the rulebook well. I think maybe I should talk about this well, like now. I think the FIA did a good job today. I think they were quick on calling red flags. I think that last decision after that chaos to call a red flag instead of a safety car to end the race, I think either way would have been very interesting. But the fact that they red flagged it there just got me super excited. Mainly because I thought that maybe they will... Well, I can't remember which red flag happened. I got excited because I thought it meant that Alonso and Stroll had a chance to get back into this. Because I thought they would restart it back to what it was before the restart that happened there. I wish I had reference, because there wasn't just one red flag. That's the problem. But it was cool. It was cool to see. So theoretically, Hulkenberg was very close to a podium. It was a potential huge fail for Aston Martin. Both Alfa Romeos and both McLarens were going to be in the points. In the end, it was both McLarens got points, which was cool. They knew Lando was going to get a good amount of points, and they knew Piastri was going to get a good amount of points. And it was really cool for Piastri to get points on his debut. I think there were a lot of jokes about Michael Massey, because Michael Massey was there in Australia. And I think this race had the same amount of laps as Abu Dhabi. So they're all like, void the last lap and all that stuff. It was chaos. In the end, if you look at the classification, only 12 people actually finished. I mean, a lot of drivers were classified because they made it through like 90% of the race. So even K-Mag theoretically didn't get a DNF result, despite causing that first red flag, because he made it so far into the race. But yeah, only 12 people finished in the end, and the unlucky people in that 12 were, it was Valtteri Bottas and who else? I can't remember now. I need to look at the results again. Oh, it was Valtteri Bottas and Sainz. It was Valtteri Bottas and Tsunoda, but then Sainz got his penalty, so then it was Valtteri Bottas and Sainz. I didn't even have to look that up. I just recalled it in my memory all by myself, so I'm quite impressed now. And then what was funny on top of all that, so yeah, obviously poor Sainz got a penalty. Very unexpected. I didn't actually expect. I bet a joke saying that would happen and Hulkenberg would get a podium. Again, Sainz got the penalty, which was unexpected. Hulkenberg didn't get the podium because they reset the results. It was sad. Like, Sainz he was heartbroken. He was basically crying over the team radio. I listened to that and it was just so sad to hear. Oscar Piastri was obviously very happy with his points on debut. He said he didn't do a good race, but they got there. I heard Lando talking afterwards as well, and he was, I don't know, he said they were just not unlucky. He was like, they were where they expected to be, which was good. I think, yeah, McLaren, they just got lucky today. I think they got lucky. I don't think they would have done as well as they initially would. You know what I mean. That, like, I just don't think they would have done that well. And having other people crash meant that they were both going to be in the points, and it was really exciting. And then what was really crazy was Hulkenberg, before he even crossed the line, was having engine troubles. Like, he crossed the track, and then right after that, he had to stop right after the finish line. On the radio, it was actually, his car was like live, so he had to do an ERS like exit, which basically means the car's live. If you touch the ground and you touch the car at the same time, you get electrocuted. So when you get out the car, you have to jump off the car, because that's just the thing. And then they have to do a bunch of stuff too. Like, this happens a lot in Formula E, but it also happens in Formula 1 because they do have like a battery system. And it's just based off the areas that they have there. But that caused a red flag after that, because you could hear in Piastri, like, his race engineer saying, like, it's a red flag. I know the race is done, but it's a red flag. Like, just don't overtake people. It's part of the precautions. You just don't want to have a penalty here. So be careful. If you are listening to the podcast on any platform or on YouTube, please leave a comment, because I'm sure there are things that I've missed in the race that I'd love to carry that discussion on in the comments. And yeah, let me know what you think about the podcast. If you're not subscribed to the channel already, or following the podcast, or you haven't given it a review, just do one of those things. I would really appreciate it if you can like it or give it a heart or whatever. It helps a lot. Like, I'm really trying to grow this podcast, and yeah, your support all means a lot. I'd just love to hear what you guys think. And if you hear this message, say that you heard it loud and clear, and just let me know. I'd love to hear feedback and see if we're doing things right or wrong. Let's talk about my predictions for the Australian Grand Prix and how they actually ended up coming about. I'm going to have a look at what I sent to last time. Last time I said there would be a red flag in practice 2. Now, I'm going to be honest, I can't remember practice 2. I feel like there probably was, but I just don't remember. So you guys can let me know in the comments if I was right or wrong there. I'm not going to give myself a point for that. I just can't remember because there was so many red flags everywhere else. I think it's a bit of a loss because red flags don't often happen, and I assumed like that my bold prediction was that there was going to be a red flag in practice 2, and there were red flags everywhere. Like, I didn't expect it to happen in the race. My race prediction was that we'd have one safety car in the race, which we did have more than one. They were very brief because they were followed by red flags, but the race basically ended under a safety car. And I said that due to something going wrong with Perez, not sure what, but he just wanted to assume me. I say he. I'm referring to myself in the third person. I was assuming that something would go wrong with Perez, which theoretically it did in qualifying, so that's like half a point. And theoretically there was a safety car due to... No, it's not. Perez didn't cause a safety car. He caused a red flag in qualifying, but no safety cars. So I can't really give myself a point there. I was right about Perez not doing well. Another prediction that I had was that Oscar Piastri was going to not finish at his home race. I was completely wrong. It was the opposite. He actually scored points on his home race. His first F1 points at his home race. It's great for him. Let's talk about my driver result predictions. From 1st to 10th, I said 1st place Verstappen, 2nd place Alonso, 3rd place Stroll, 4th place Leclerc, 5th place Hamilton, 6th place Sainz, 7th place Russell, 8th place was Gasly, 9th place went to Ocon, and 10th place went to Alex Albon. 6 of those 10 people did not finish. The only people in that list that finished the race was Verstappen, Alonso, Stroll, and Hamilton. which they were the top five, and the actual prediction was that they were top five as well. I oh I I assumed that Perez would be fifth when I made my predictions, and that was actually somewhat close because Perez ended up, I think, like, wait, Perez did come fifth. I was right about Perez, and oh no, wait, sorry. I'm reading my predictions versus what actually happened. I predicted that Perez wasn't going to be in the top 10. Never mind, I'm wrong. I'm very wrong. I predicted Verstappen would come first. That was right. Second, Alonso. That was wrong because Hamilton came second, then Alonso came third, and Stroll came fourth. I was saying Stroll would come right after Alonso, which was correct, but obviously I assumed Alonso would come second, so I assumed Stroll would come third. Leclerc I assumed would come fourth. He didn't finish. Fifth, I said would go to Hamilton. He finished second. Sixth was Sainz. Sainz ended up being classified as 11th, and if not, he would have actually been like P4 or something. Then Russell was poor George. Russell, I predicted 7th. He was actually doing way better than I predicted, and but then he had his failures. Gasly and Ocon were 8 and 9. They ended up not finishing, obviously. Albon 10th. He crashed very early on, so I was very wrong with my predictions this weekend. But that's what makes my predictions interesting. I always hope I'm wrong because that means the race would probably be interesting. And today's race was very interesting. I really enjoyed it. I'm suddenly an F1 fan again. I was quite bored after these Middle East races, and Australia has brought hope back to the universe. I wanted to talk about the current standings, and this makes me realize that I actually want to look at the Constructors Standings. So let's look at the drivers first. First of all, we have Verstappen with 69 points. Nice. He is 15 points ahead of Perez in second with 54. And Perez is 9 points ahead of Alonso. So Alonso could catch Perez and come second in the championship if Perez keeps messing up, and if, Aston Martin pick things up. So it's interesting. He's in the fight there. But the actual tight fight is what I assume is going to be between Alonso and Lewis Hamilton. Alonso 45 points. Fourth place is Lewis Hamilton with 38 points. It's only a 7-point difference. And things could happen there. I forgot to mention that Alonso had done pretty well in the sense that he's just come third every race this season. It's got quite a record there. Tsunoda, if Sainz didn't get the penalty, Tsunoda would have been 11th, and that's the record for most consecutive race finishes in a position that's not first, and which is a really rough position to be in. That 1 point away from points, one position away from getting a point. That sucks. Tsunoda's been really unlucky. He's been so close yet so far this whole time. Fifth is Carlos Sainz with 20 points. There's a big gap between him and Lewis Hamilton. Then we have Stroll tied with Carlos Sainz in sixth place for 20 points. Russell has 18 points, very close to Stroll and Sainz. But yeah, Lewis has got quite a gap on the rest of the field. Then we have Lando Norris. He went from 0 points today. He's 8th place with 8 points. He's ahead of Nico Hulkenberg, who is 9th with 6 points. Charles Leclerc is tied with Nico Hulkenberg at 6 points. So in the standings, Lando Norris and Nico Hulkenberg are ahead of Charles Leclerc. I'm sure Matt from P1, with Matt and Tommy, is depressed looking at that result. Valtteri Bottas rounds off that with 11th, being with 4 points. A lot of people with 4 points. Esteban Ocon also 4 points. Oscar Piastri 4 points. Pierre Gasly 4 points. Obviously, this is just based off their race finishes and their best finishing positions, the scores work out, which decides who's 11th versus 14th, despite them all being on the same points. Then we have Zhou Guanyu. He moved up from lower down by getting 2 points today. Yuki Tsunoda got a point today, so he's moved up as well. He's P16. K-Mag has got a point from the first race of the season. He is 17th. Alex Albon has a point from the first race as well. Or was it from Jeddah? I can't remember. From Jeddah. Alex Albon got his point in Jeddah. And he's P18. Then we have Logan Sargent. And then finally Nick de Vries, which is different to what I expected, because I didn't expect Haas to be... Well, no, Haas is really split down the middle. I'm surprised Logan Sargent isn't last, but now he is almost last, so it is actually happening how I expected it to be. Williams is good, but they just haven't been lucky. They're good enough to score a point. They've just been unlucky with how they've been doing lately. Let's look at the constructors quickly. I haven't looked at that yet. Red Bull's far ahead. They've got almost double the points that Aston Martin has. Aston Martin's at 65, Red Bull's at 123. That looks pretty cool because it's like a 1, 2, 3 with points. Mercedes is only 9 points behind Aston Martin with 56 points. So it's a tight fight for second between Aston Martin and Mercedes. Ferrari is 14 points ahead of McLaren, 30 points behind Mercedes. So right now, if you look at it, like it's a fight with Ferrari and McLaren for fourth. But, McLaren's only scored their first points today, I think. So it is what it is. Alpine's down in sixth, so it's quite crazy to think McLaren's actually ahead of Alpine. That's hilarious. Just because Alpine should be, ahead. And if Alpine was doing well, they'll probably be close to fighting Ferrari. And then we have Haas at seventh, Alfa Romeo at P8 with 6 points. Haas also has 7 points. AlphaTauri and Williams both have 1 point. But AlphaTauri's consistent positions have been better, with Yuki Tsunoda always being 11th. They've been better than Williams, so that puts them ahead of Williams. This is crazy. It's crazy to think about. That's pretty much going to be it for the podcast. I usually do the Drive Star review, and I am going to do it, but this podcast has been going on for almost 40 minutes. So I'm going to save the Drive Star review for another podcast later this week. Maybe we can pick up some news items that I might have left off. Maybe the results change. Either way, we will have another podcast this week where I talk about that. And then later on in the month, we'll talk about some other cool things happening in the F1 world. It might not be F1 itself. It could be the feeder series. I'm very interested to see what F1 Academy is all about. That should be an interesting series to watch. And we'll probably get a bit more light on that and how successful it is later on the year at the Grand Prix in Austin, Texas. Because the F1 Academy race will be featured at that event. Either way, I highly encourage you guys to check out the feeder events. If you haven't watched them live, you can watch those. They'll be interesting to watch during this season break where nothing's been happening. I'm probably going to watch other series as well, like IndyCar and Formula E, and have a look at what's going on there. I hope you guys have a great, happy Easter, and I'll chat to you guys soon. Have a good one. All the best. Goodbye.